Hello, everyone, and welcome to International Trade Live. My name's Joseph Clarke, and I'm the editor of International Trade magazine. I'm delighted to be joined this morning by Lord Dominic Johnson, Minister of State in the Department of Business and Trade. Good morning, Lord Dominic.
Morning. Thanks for inviting me on your programme.
Could you begin by explaining what sparked your interest in global trade and investment, and also how you got to where you are today, working with the Department of Business and Trade?
Yeah, well, thanks for those questions. I've always been very, very interested in financial markets, and particularly global emerging markets. And my first job was at Robert Fleming back in 1995, very nearly 30 years ago now, covering Hong Kong, Singapore and Malaysian markets. And I was very lucky after a couple of years to be sent to Hong Kong to work for Jardine Fleming. So this is in 1998, just after the handover. And it was fascinating for a number of reasons. Sort of on the downside, but at the same time, in terms of life experiences upside, I arrived literally at the apex of the Asian financial crisis. Now, many people watching your programme might not be aware or remember that period, but it was the sort of first major global crisis, certainly of my lifetime, and it effectively come about because of excessive borrowing, very, very high levels of growth, and then a sort of change in the economic climate. And Hong Kong was really the epicenter of that, but the rest of the Asian countries followed suit. So I learned a great deal about sort of capital flows, markets, and investing at that stage. And I decided in 1998 to set my own business up. I've always at heart been an entrepreneur, which I actually think is quite a useful skill set to bring into government. It's a very different skill set to some policy making and legislating. And I set my first company up, which was a construction equipment auction website, which today in 2023 seems rather old-fashioned, but at the time I had to actually explain to people what the internet was. So I seized on this new technology, which enabled the world basically to shrink, which is what the internet allows you to do. The web allows you to access all this information from around the world. And so we set this business up that auctioned construction equipment, particularly from Asia, where there was a lot of bankrupt stock because of the crisis, and auctioned that heavy machinery, cranes and diggers and so on, back into Europe and the US. I sold that business in the end. It was a learning experience. I wouldn't pretend that it was the great .com unicorn, but I learned a great deal, actually. I learned a great deal about how hard it is to run a business and the skill sets you need in order to run a successful business and to grow it. And there are across the board challenges such as personnel, raising money, making sure your product is high enough quality, and making sure that your whole company is marketable, and corporate culture and other elements like that are very important. I then went and joined Lloyd George Management, which was a boutique global emerging markets and Asian fund management business. And I joined their business to develop their business to grow to basically be the director of marketing, which I did for about 6 or 7 years. And then in 2007, I set Somerset Capital Management up. And Somerset really was a continuum to some extent of the work we've been doing at Lloyd George. It was a global emerging markets specialist investment management business. And it really grew very successfully for a number of years. And what I was most intrigued by is the fact that London, where the business was based, became the capital and has retained that title. And it's very important we keep that title into the future of being the capital of international global finance. So there we were, based in Mayfair. Eventually we moved to Victoria, running global emerging markets investments, often for pools of capital in global emerging markets or in Asian markets, and doing that from the capital of the United Kingdom. So really a really powerful example of sort of where intellectual sort of power and the importance of the City of London is sort of very clearly exemplified. And then I've always been interested in politics. I was associated with the Conservative Party for a number of years. I helped them on their financial side, helped run their finances, which again was a very interesting experience because the political party is unique, really, unlike a business or even a political role. Everyone's a volunteer, effectively. So managing hundreds of thousands of volunteers and trying to run your organisation around that clearly, is a very rewarding and purposeful experience, but it's also, presents its own unique challenges. And over the last few years, I had a particular interest in international trade. I'm sure we'll have other questions on that in a moment, but I'm a passionate believer in free trade to make people wealthier. It's really as simple as that, and it has enormous concomitant benefits. Trade brings people together. It enriches the nation. It gives us greater range of products. It drives prices down, and it really is at the core, in my view, of both freedoms and perpetuating longer, happier lives for human beings on this earth. So I really wanted to throw myself a bit more into that agenda, and I became a director, or non-executive director, of the Department for International Trade when Liz Truss was the Secretary of State. And after a few years, I became lead non-executive director, which is sort of like being a non-executive chairman of the department, a really interesting role, part-time. So I was able to do my business at the same time, but also, give quite a bit of discretionary effort into that role. And then when Liz Truss became Prime Minister, I was asked to take on the role of Investment Minister, which is something I've always wanted to do, because I wanted to bring my experience of international markets, but most importantly of marketing and salesmanship into the government, and to support a Conservative government whose agenda I very much believed in. So it's been a wonderful journey, actually. Many great ups, but a lot of downs. It's not a straight line, people's lives and careers, and running businesses is complex and tough. And I'm very grateful to have this opportunity now to perform this role, which I absolutely love. I'm very, very lucky to do it. But really importantly, I hope I brought some valuable skills to it. And we've had some great results. I've got a fabulous team behind me, but I really, really think that through the perspectives that I've managed to bring, we've achieved some additional successes.
So focusing on your current role now then as Minister of State for the Department of Business and Trade, what does your work in that position?
So it's a variety of different things. I mean, I think when I break my role down, the first part of the job is to be a sort of transactional leader, to be a marketeer, to go out there and help companies who are making significant investments into the UK. And a good example of that is the Tata Gigafactory, which is an enormous win for the UK. I think it's going to be the biggest building ever built in our history, or the biggest collection of buildings or something like that. I mean, this is an amazing win. And that work was led by myself, but clearly very much supported by an extremely able team in the Department for Business and Trade, the Office for Investment, numerous colleagues of mine, ministers, and the Prime Minister, frankly, led the charge. So that's a transactional piece, and I'm dealing with that probably 30% of every day, is dealing with a company that's trying to make an investment and they need assistance. Often they're looking for financial support, so it's helping them navigate the different pools of capital we have available for that. Often it's just simple things, they need assistance, understanding how our visa process works for high potential staff and so on. So that's one part, and it's a core part of the investment minister role. The second part is helping lead the investment sort of department in the Department for Business and Trade. And that's a really interesting and also challenging but exciting role. We probably have about 650 odd people dotted around the world and in the UK. And my big program has been to supplement our very good contact base with the industrial capital, by which I mean companies like Mitsubishi or Siemens or EDF or Caterpillar, where we have good relationships, and often they have government relations departments who are quite well connected into our governmental system. So to build on that and look at what I call the pools of capital. So these are the sovereign wealth funds, the big pension funds, and the very big sort of private equity and venture funds, because that's the future. It's getting those organisations to put more capital into the UK that will allow us to have the financing that we need to become the science and technology superpower that we actually have to become if we're going to survive as a nation. And I'm happy to talk about that in a bit more detail. And then the third part is influencing government. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm seen as the representative of business and investment into Whitehall rather than the other way around. And I spend a great deal of time just really trying to tilt the Whitehall machine to look at its activities through the lens of the investor. And that's very important. And I found my colleagues are incredibly open to comments and suggestions that I make, which come from what I literally call my client base. How can we improve the planning process, the visa system, grid connectivity, the funding structures, and yet at the same time, the civil service or the government itself doesn't necessarily put that front and center of their decision making, because often the pressures and priorities are different. So my role as an ambassador for business interests and investment into the government system is really important, and that takes a good degree of my time, probably the final third. So it's an amazingly varied job, but with one principal goal, which is to make sure that the UK is the absolute preeminent destination for international capital in the world. And that's at the core of every day I say, am I doing something that leads me to enable that outcome? And that sort of lets me work backwards in terms of sort of how I spend my time.
To achieve the outcome that you've just mentioned, you did include a couple of examples of larger enterprises like Mitsubishi. What does the Department for Business and Trade do to help smaller companies, so SMEs or even startups?
Yeah, very, very important. And I think it's absolutely right that you raise that question, because um, my sort of attention when it comes to looking at the capital pools is particularly relevant when it comes to helping SMEs in the UK. So that's why I've been trying to get that shift away simply from the industrial capital that comes in to build a new gigafactory or a new manufacturing plant, which is very important, but to supplement that in terms of actual bringing money into the UK, which then feeds directly into from the startup economy upwards. So one particular project we're working on is the spin out universe coming out of universities in the UK. That's a crucial component of our science and technology revolution. It requires a lot of money, but it's quite fragmented and disparate. So you need quite sophisticated mechanisms. If a significant pool of capital, the sovereign wealth fund in Singapore, wants to access sort of £100,000 or £500,000 investments, you need to set up an ecosystem to manage that. So that's one project I'm particularly working on. And I think the government in general is very aware and very pointed towards small and medium-sized entities. And there are a great deal of funding mechanisms in the UK. The British Business Bank, which sits atop of a great structure of different funding mechanisms, is very focused on getting capital to startups and to early stage businesses, particularly in the sort of the future economy areas. So that could be clean energy, it could be life sciences, tech, fintech, whatever it may be. Because without that, we're not going to have the inventions, literally the products that will keep us preeminent as an economy. And then I think that the Department of Business and Trade does a good job, but I'm going to say where I think we could do better in a moment. We're not perfect, but does a very good job in terms of mentoring. And we have a variety of different programs which help both exporters, which is also an important element of our work, but it's not my specific focus, but it sort of fits together, and small businesses in terms of scaling up, in terms of sort of expanding really and growing, finding, again, the right pools of capital to help them do that. And I think that from my point of view, in terms of the project I'm doing around university spin-outs, that's a very good example of where government can help, which is to help provide the entrepreneurial and executive framework around often very talented academics who may not just have the business experience, drive, or not want to lose the focus on their core skill set, which is to support them building themselves as a business. So we do a mixture of programs. For me, my primary focus is getting capital into the country to help those companies grow. And if I do that, then I've sort of achieved my goal in that sense. But the rest of the government is very engaged in just trying to physically help smaller businesses, even if it's directly giving them a mentor, through to helping them find partners around the world to export or to invest in their business.
And apart from the challenge of obtaining capital and also perhaps lack of knowledge and therefore needing training, what are some of the other challenges that the UK businesses are facing?
Well, again, very good question. I mean, challenges for businesses can sometimes be unique. It's the difficulty of developing the product and selling it, the difficulty of growing your business, hiring the right people, making you navigate often the complex framework of regulations that all governments bring to bear in order to have sort of functioning markets. I mean, I think certainly access to capital is something that comes up continually with me, and that's only natural. And actually, it's important that there are a lot of companies that want capital. You can't have a thriving market unless you've got lots of companies who are hungry for capital. So that the opportunity set has to be there. And it's like chicken and egg, because of course one thing follows another. A lot of money is now coming into the UK, and in order to sort of satisfy that need, because we have such strong intellectual capital power. But what I'm trying to do is to sort of go back to the basics and sort of say, well, how do we get more investment or venture or private equity capital into the UK? And it's not just a question of going around the world with a sort of brochure or doing marketing. It's about getting those companies to set up in the UK, predominantly in or around the City of London, because then that gives you an important home bias. They see the opportunities firsthand. They're here. They're more likely to allocate. And we've been running a very successful program over the last year since I took on this job of getting particularly the big sovereign wealth funds and superannuation funds in Australia, the big pension funds in Canada, and so on, the Gulf SWFs, to put people in London. And I'm also working on other plans to try and have sort of flexible working spaces for corporate venture capital firms, venture capital companies, or whatever, to come to the UK and sort of to test the water, come here for a short period of time, make it very easy for them to come here. Then when they see what they like what they see, they'll then establish themselves more permanently. That's really important. The ecosystem and the people are not to be underestimated. And again, that's a sort of knowledge set that I bring with me, having spent my whole life in boutique asset management. And if you look at where it's worked really well, I mean, clearly, California, Menlo Park, everyone knows that. That's where they all are. If you go there, it's this road. It's just a great, very long road filled with venture capital and tech investors. Kendall Square in Boston is another very good example of that. And I would say the third example of that actually is the city, but it's quite broad based and it's quite spread out and it's quite big finance. So for me, sort of cultivating a sort of ecosystem, a forest floor of thousands of sort of caterpillars and mosses and fungi, of sort of smaller businesses that are very specialists that can manage those quite complex types of investment into spin-outs and startups. That's a really big ambition for me, and it's starting to work. But it's a process that doesn't happen overnight, and I'm glad to say that we've got a lot of support for our ambitions.
And moving on to a slightly different topic, there's been a huge amount of trade deals agreed over the past few years, and investment partnerships. You recently wrote about the UK and Kuwait's long-standing friendship and signing of the investment partnership. What would you say are the most significant outcomes that can be expected from this partnership for both nations?
Well, I mean, Kuwait is probably our longest in sort of investment partnership in the history of this country. They started in 1952, I think. So on the first year of Her Majesty the Queen's reign, was that 1952? I hope I haven't got that wrong. The first year of Her Majesty the Queen's reign, and they celebrated 75 years or whatever it was. Yes. About 2 months ago. So an amazing period of consistent and continued investment into the UK. And that's very important because, what do we offer? Stability and predictability and long-term investment returns. And that's at the core of the desirability of the offering of the United Kingdom. So we mustn't forget that. We must treasure that and cherish it. I must say that's really important. So, Kuwait have been consistent investors in the UK, and they're investors across the board. They've got a lot of property investments in the UK. They've invested in a number of different, utilities and important elements of our infrastructure, which is again crucial to the growth of this nation. So, their commitment to continuing to increase their investment level in the UK is really important. It's actual money into the economy, for one thing. So that's very, very relevant indeed. And secondly, it acts as an important beacon for the rest of the world. And people, saw that we signed up to this new, refreshed partnership, and it makes them think, well, hang on, if the KIO is doing it and they're very sophisticated, the longest pedigree sovereign wealth fund in the world, then that makes it sort of more legitimate for us to make further inquiries. So, there's a whole range of opportunities there. But as much as anything else, it's continuing that relationship and making sure that they feel properly concierged in the United Kingdom in terms of their investments, and that we are always making sure that we're marketing to them the opportunities that present themselves. I mean, don't underestimate the need. If you ain't yelling, you ain't selling, and you've got to get out there. And so by having these agreements, you're continually reinforcing the message. Come to the United Kingdom, you're going to get fabulous returns. It's an excellent long-term investment opportunity, and we want you to look at us, today. Let's get your attention, and I can then show you the possibilities that we offer.
And what other initiatives or deals are in the pipeline, or do you hope that the UK will see over the next coming years?
Well, masses. I mean, if I think of my sort of daily work, it's getting MOUs with big sovereign wealth funds, just like with Kuwait. We did one with Bahrain a few weeks earlier. I'm looking to do further work with the UAE, with Saudi Arabia in the Gulf, with the Singaporean sovereign wealth funds, and particularly, Canada and Australia are two very important points of access for us. So building closer relationships with those very big capital pools, so that they're always thinking about us and we're helping them when it comes to guiding their significant investments into the UK. And the second bit down is to get, as I say, the ecosystem of international capital centered on the UK, so that we're the number one international HQ for corporate venture capital pools. And that, again, that's an industry in itself. It requires a great deal of people to work on this. It doesn't happen overnight, but that's a continual sort of push from my point of view. And then to assist my Secretary of State, Kevin Badenoch, and my colleagues like Nigel Huddleston, Nusrat Ghani and Kevin Hollingrake and so on, in terms of expanding our trade networks around the world. So free trade deals, and you're the magazine for international trade, so this should be sort of your front page mantra. Free trade deals are good for everyone. They're genuinely good for the world. They create wealth, they create jobs, they lower consumer prices, and I think they bring countries together. However, there are often evolutionary processes around changing economies to suit free trade environments that I'm very sensitive to. So I don't just trumpet, let's have a free trade deal and, the consequences will be positive enough to deal with the transition, because that's not the case. So, working with industries that are affected by free trade and global trade patterns is very, very important. But ultimately, we need to continue to press for having more liberal markets in the UK, because that just benefits everybody. And we're working on CPTPP. I'm the minister taking the legislation through the House of Lords. We're going to initiate it from the House of Lords, which is relatively unusual. So I'm very excited about that opportunity, because it will give me a chance to trumpet again the benefits of trade deals and the benefits of a post-Brexit vision of Britain. We couldn't do these things unless we're outside the European Union. So, this is an important political point to make, but also it will give economic advantage to our citizens. And so when I think of, as I said actually before I came on this call, I was sort of writing a list of, actions for, the coming months. What was I hoping to deliver? And the CPTPP successful passage through the House of Lords is definitely one of my absolute priorities.
Well, thank you very much for that strong and very positive message that you're sending out to our audience. Just to finish then, what would be your final message or your final comments to leave UK businesses with today, whether they be large or small, in terms of the years to come, what we can expect to see over the next coming years in UK trade and investment?
Well, firstly, thanks for letting me come and talk to you today. I love talking about free trade. I'm always keen to propagate my message. I mean, I'm an optimist. I really do think that the future of this world, in terms of the technology development that's going to improve our lives, and more trade and more dialogue between peoples and nations, is very much the long-term trend, even if it may not feel like that today. And it behoves us to push that agenda hard. I mean, the Conservative government is at its absolute core a free trade liberal markets promoter, and our entire ambition is to make us into a science and technology superpower, which will benefit everyone both involved in those industries. That includes clean tech right the way through to sort of life sciences, but also in terms of the whole power of the country itself to create wealth and to have control over our own destiny. That's at the root of this, and it is a national endeavour. It is an important focus point for everyone in this country to make sure we retain our dominance in terms of technological advancement, and in terms of our free trade agenda. So I can look forward to, I hope, some really powerful announcements in the next year, free trade discussions or even agreements with great countries like Korea, Canada, Mexico, India. We're in the middle of a free trade negotiation at the moment, the GCC, and numerous other countries. So that constant stream of free trade announcements is going to be really powerful, because suddenly we look up and we look around and see the world as genuinely our oyster to take advantage of. So optimistic future, a lot of activity in terms of our free trade agenda. But as I say, at the end of the day, it's up to you all to support that agenda vocally, and I look forward to being part of this important movement that actually we need to sort of re-engage with. And all of the people watching this program, you can link in with me. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm very keen always to help individuals succeed when they're looking to get investment from abroad, and to show them that I'm available to them. So please, send me your thoughts, issues, complaints, ideas, and every now and again, some points of optimism, because I always welcome, and that's what keeps us going. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you once again, Lord Dominic Johnson. It's been a fantastic way to start the day and to start the event.